I was 40 when I first had a panic attack. It was not something I expected to happen, but that's what triggered me to go into this life of entrepreneurship and working with startups. I've been with the same company 15 years, and one day I walked out of the office and my phone beeped. I saw I had my email, and it just hit me like a sledgehammer. And I'm not the sort of person I would expect to have a panic attack. I've done a lot of crazy things in my life, from crawling through obstacle courses and being hit by electric wires through to boxing matches in drag in front of several thousand people. And I realised how bad things were at that moment at the company I was with. But that was not what actually triggered me to immediately leave. That happened a couple of months later. And I handed my notice in. A few things happened, which are for another time. But when I walked out of the office that day, it felt like, if anyone's ever done rucking, where you wear a backpack with heavy weights and go hiking in it, it felt like I had dropped that bag as I walked out of the office. I left there for 2 months worth of gardening leave, never heard from the company again. And it's quite a big company over here, if you know my history. What I didn't know then, though, was the amount of stuff I would be picking up and putting in the next backpack. This life I had chosen of working for myself, working with startups and working internationally, has a whole different range of problems with it. So I left there. I had planned my leave date to be the date of a big blockchain conference on the Isle of Man, the first of its kind. Unfortunately, COVID hit. So I had to completely change my plans. And in essence, that's when I began Dan's Bizarre Adventures in Blockchain. It was absolutely madness for 5 years. If you've never heard of blockchain stuff, if you don't know about crypto, it is one of the most insane places you can work in. And when I was planning this talk, I was listing some of the companies and writing them down, who I'd worked with, the things I'd worked on. And I actually wrote it a couple of weeks ago. And I sat there last night and thought, God, this is boring. So I completely changed it. And what I've done instead is I've turned this into a list of some of the lessons I've learned over the last 4 or 5 years from working with these absolutely crazy startups. And some of the startups, I won't tell you who they are because it's pretty iffy what they were doing, but a lot of them I will talk about. I would say as well, if you've got any questions, do ask them. Otherwise, it's just going to be me standing here in front of some rather bonkers pictures for the next hour. So, to begin with, other people's incompetence will cause you nightmares as an entrepreneur, and there is nothing you can do with it. It just happens sometimes. And I know we talk about weaponized incompetence sometimes, but there is just genuine stupidity with people who are surprisingly highly ranked in companies, and you will have to deal with that. So when I first started, so this is back in 2020, I had certified as a blockchain solutions architect a few months earlier, left the job I was with, and I had found a company who wanted me to write their pitch deck. And they also wanted me to support them on their tech stack. They were building a medical blockchain solution. It was embedded in one of the hospitals in the UK. Product worked, but the back end of it hadn't been built by the developer at the time. They just hadn't scoped it properly. So they were going for a VC raise for just over $2 million. So I worked with them, I wrote the pitch deck, and it was a damn good deck. The VC company, we gave it to them and they said, yep, we love this. So 2 weeks later, we got an email back saying the Japanese investors have pulled out. No other explanation of it. As a result of that, company ran out of money, company closed down, this very good product they had completely died a death. Now the reason I talk about this one here is because it took a few months, but we found out what had actually happened. One of the VC staff, instead of going and getting my nice, well-written deck translated into Japanese, put it in Google Translate, stuck it in a deck, and sent that over to them. And of course, the investors went, this is all garbled nonsense. We're not investing in it. And that sort of thing, it wasn't particularly malicious of him, because he would have made a lot of money off it as well. It was just sheer incompetence. And unfortunately, he was quite a highly ranked person. And when you start working with companies, you very quickly realize, particularly in a space like that where there is a lot of free money floating around, how bad some of these people are at just general common sense. Now, sometimes you get to the chance to stop working with them. There's been plenty of companies where I've realized there's an issue and I've stepped back, but sometimes that sort of thing happens. And in the startup space, unfortunately, you can't avoid it. You just have to suck it up and get over it at times. And that's really the first lesson of it, that for 5 years, I say I've encountered this quite a lot, and it's really one of those problems you have to deal with. Now, the next lesson I learned, and this might be more specific to the niche I was working in, is that occasionally you get a chance to do something that seems so bonkers and so outrageous, you think, I shouldn't do this. But you actually need to try these things. So back in early 2020, mid-2020, I was contacted by a guy called Rich Teller. He's a director, a true storyteller. When he contacted me, he actually called me as a character from one of his films he was working on. And I had no idea, so I get this phone call from a guy called Tom, and he talks to me about this documentary he's making following a crypto influencer who is creating a scam token, a scam coin, and how he's investigating for stealing all this person's life savings. Now, as we talked further, it came out that it's actually Rich was playing this character in the film. He had the outline for it. And for the next 2 years, I worked with him on a full-length film project, which became The Fakefluencer. Now, this is before Facebook became Meta and ruined the concept of the metaverse. This is before things like VR, Web3 all went mainstream. We were filming in VR. We actually had our meetings with the team inside VR environments. We tried a load of them. Microsoft used to do a VR environment, if anyone ever tried it. Absolutely rubbish. Shockingly bad. But we would go there and we'd have meetings, and we met with a load of these people who were building these solutions about how they did it. We released an NFT series, so a digital asset, 60,000 we minted that sold out. We filmed in VR, which was something pretty much unheard of. That we couldn't find anyone to tell us how to do that. We were literally making it up as we went along. And I say as a result of that, we created a feature-length film, which is still available out there. And it's the sort of thing that I would never have got to do. Sat at the previous company working on, spreadsheets and in SQL. It wouldn't have happened. But because when I spoke to him, I thought, you know what? I'm not here to play the safe game anymore. I'm going to take this risk. And it was almost a 2-year project we did. And things like that, when you're freed from the traditional corporate structures, should we say, you get the opportunities like this. There was another one a few years ago that I was contacted about through the government, where they wanted to put NFTs on the moon. And it seems like the most bonkers idea possible, but they had it mapped out. They had a plan for how it would work. And I was able to map up the technical solution to how to do it. And out of all the government departments you think should not be involved in a cutting edge technology one, it was the post office who wanted to be part of it. They wanted to put NFTs of stamps on the moon. But the stuff like that will crop up. And I know guys who've turned down projects like that. I know some of the guys in crypto and Web3 particularly, who had the opportunity to start or get in very early with projects where the founders ended up retiring to their own private islands kind of level. And they didn't take the opportunity because they didn't take the risk. And part of the advantage of doing your own thing, of being an entrepreneur, of having this, is the ability to make those choices and say, yes, I'm going to do this just because I can. Back in 2021, so I was doing a lot of marketing at the time, and I've done a lot over the last few years as well. But I was working as a marketer, and I was leading a marketing team. Now, one thing to understand about crypto and Web3 is the decentralized nature of it means your team members are scattered everywhere. Gone are the days in the previous job when I would be working from a laptop, I would be remoting into the company system, but I would still have to be sat at the desk in the company office in order to work. When we were doing this, people were everywhere. We often knew nothing about them as well. So for example, there were people I worked with for almost a year. In the case of coin payments, I worked there for 6 months, who I would know nothing about them other than what their work output was and a Telegram handle. I didn't know their age, their gender, where they were based, nothing else. I just knew what work they did. But with coin payments particularly, I worked with a woman called Kate Krasnova. And I say worked with, she was the team lead. And in the 6 months I was there, I had 2 meetings. The first was when I joined and she said, we'll do a quick 15-minute meeting so you can have a chat with me. And the second was just before I left when they got a new CMO in. And we were producing mountains of work every week between myself and the team. And we were able to do it because of the processes in place. And this is something on the AI side now. I know a few of the partners here will have the same thing. You can't do it unless you have processes in place. You can't just go, we're going to slap this solution in and hope it's going to work. So with coin payments, Kate had built a very robust management tool for us all to use. And it was only built in Trello, which is a Kanban board model. But everyone at all times knew what they were working on, what was expected of them, what output they wanted, and all these things. So we could sit there and we could say, right, we know what is coming in every day. We can get this cadence going. We can make sure things are done at the quality we need. And this is something that where companies I see fall down, when I'm talking particularly with startups, every startup I've worked with that has gone horribly wrong, there's been something wrong with their processes, a major point of it. And I always say it's product, people and processes are the 3 areas you look at. Processes are the one that companies continually get wrong. And in startups as well, there tends to be a tendency to run before you can walk. The race to get things out, to get things live. And that means your processes, which are the boring bit where you write down what you're doing, doesn't tend to happen as much. So whenever I'm working with a startup, one of the things I'll always say is, what have you written down? Just please write something down, and particularly developers. I know there's a few developers in the room. Whether or not you like to write things down, I've never yet met a developer who likes doing documentation. But that's what will help you with a startup and when you're running one. And I say, if you do have any questions, please ask. Otherwise, I might run out of slides very quickly. Now, ethics versus money. I've said this at talks, with the AI talks we do. And I've said that there is a constant battle between your ethics and your ability to make money. And with AI, we all talk about ethics and how important ethics are and how vital it is. In Web3, ethics was a very, very floaty concept at best. There was one that I worked with, which I'm not going to name, quite early on again. And they had a very good product idea. It was solar-powered tokenomics. So the idea was you would have solar panels on your roof, you would store the electricity in batteries, that would be tokenized, and then you could trade it as a value that way. And to the extent that they were looking at splitting the company in half and having the solar section of it versus the blockchain bit, and they wanted me to run the blockchain section. And I actually stepped away from them and a considerable amount of money because of what they were doing. Now, in this case, they had a tokenomics model where you got crypto tokens and you could store them in their vault. After a certain amount of time, you could withdraw them, and the way the tokenomics worked meant you get more or less of your tokens out. The problem was the UK legislation changed, and well, it didn't change, they started enforcing it, and they were told they had to close the vault. But because the token price had changed, it meant everyone who was in the vault couldn't have the same number of tokens out. They had to have a lot more. Now, I'd had a conversation with the founder, and he'd said, we're going to have to mint some more. And with crypto, the one thing you never want to do is mint more tokens. The entire point of it is there is this much of them out there. We know exactly how many are being released, and everyone can figure out from there. Now, they started off with, I think it was about 49 million tokens, whatever it was, when they had this. And they estimated to me they were going to need to print off another 7 or 8 million. When the founder wouldn't tell me how many they were printing, and he wouldn't tell me when it had been done, he wouldn't release on the chain the figures, I chose to step back because my ethics, I'd spent 6 months managing a audience of 20,000 people in the Discord and the Telegram groups. I thought, I can't, in all honesty, talk to these people and honestly say this is a good thing for the business. I mean, it actually turns out they minted about another 500 million of them and then sat on them in case of emergencies. Now, I could have stayed there. I could have had a good chunk of those tokens probably. I could have had a very well-paying job. But because of my ethics, I went, there's a line even I won't cross. And when you're in the space like Web3 or something like AI where it's very bleeding edge, you are constantly pushing against your ethical boundaries. I know people who have very strong ethics who will rationalize what they are doing, and you talk to them about why they are doing certain things, and they will rationalize it. And the reality is, we all have mortgages, we all have to feed our kids. Ethics tend to go out the window when that happens. Now, the reason I talk about this now is with the AI side. One of the things I talk about with AI is ethics in it and how you can embed that in the various models you're using and how certain models have different ethical standards. For example, I've been playing with Grok a couple of days ago. I had a quick go with it just to see what it was and how it works. It's got some loose ethics, that model. It's even worse than you think. But that is a deliberate choice by them. And make no mistake, they're not saying we're going to, Grok has accidentally started making porn all the time. It's a deliberate choice because they know there is a market for that. Whether or not Elon Musk has ethics is a bit of a grey area, but most companies wouldn't do that. And we see this happen all the time. ChatGPT, Sam Altman recently said about they are considering having more adult-friendly modes and looser guide rails on ChatGPT. And again, it's that thing of they need to make money, and in their case, they need to make a lot of money. So they're letting those ethical frameworks slide. They're letting them drift a bit because if they don't, they're going to run out of cash and they need to find a way to do it. Now, with the Web3 companies, there was a lot of money happening very quickly. So ethics used to go remarkably quickly. There was one company I was with where normally if you get a VC raise, just you get the money, but it's not your money. It's not like someone goes to you, yep, here's 5 million quid. You have that and then spend it on the companies you want. They are very strict about what you can spend it on and how you use it. So the founders don't normally get a lot of money from it. In the case of Web3, they would do a fundraiser. They would often do a crowdsourced raise or get VC money. And there was one company I worked with, which, without going into technicalities how it was configured, it was a voting-based system. But the way it was set up, the founders had all the voting rights. So they voted for themselves to have 100k plus salaries when the project wasn't making any money. And they didn't really do anything hands-on day-to-day either. But again, there's these sort of ethical issues. As a startup, you have to decide that. We all sat in the meeting with them and said, look, you can't give yourself all this money. The audience is going to go mental. It's a bad plan. You're going to burn through it all. But from their point of view, they had done the work. They deserved the cash. Something else that, and again, this is something I always say to startups and to particularly consultants and freelancers. So I was talking to one a couple of months ago who's a copywriter, and they were talking about whether or not they should upskill themselves in things like web development as well. Now, my approach to this is you should not be the person who does one thing and then leaves. You need to be the person who solves their problem, because that's what they're paying you for, and that's why they'll keep paying you. And you do that by making people's lives easier. So there was one company I worked with called Spool. This is a DeFi company, and I was there for 2 years. During that 2 years, we went through 6 CMOs and at least 4 full marketing teams. And I was the only person who stayed for that period. I think the longest running member of the team after me had managed about 6 months. And that was because I just solved problems for them. I didn't complain and moan about things like some of the CMOs did. I didn't overanalyze things like the developers did. I just kind of solved the problem. So there's an example of a time where I was a copywriter for them, and I did all their copywriting, all the things like that. And they said, actually, our tech docs are out of date. So I said, well, I can do that. So I did that for them. And then one day they said, oh, all the guys are going to an event. The new website isn't live yet because the developers are arguing with the founders about how it should look and what it should do. So I said, well, actually, I can build your website as well. And it wasn't the best website because it was built in 2 days. But it was live and it worked and it solved their problem. So when the next founder or next boss came in and CMO came in and said, right, I need to assess who in the team we're going to keep, the founder turned and said, well, he actually built that website for us that you quite liked, so we'll keep him. And everyone else went. And that's, again, it's a consistent theme through the companies that the people who I've worked with, particularly in a remote role, it's very easy to get rid of people. It doesn't tend to happen as much in office-based roles because you're facing people and it's much harder to get rid of them that way. But if you're remote, there is nothing stopping someone sending you an email saying, right, particularly if you're a contractor, you're done, kick you out of all the groups, and they never hear from you again. But if you're the person who makes their lives easier, they don't tend to do it. If you're the person who constantly comes and kicks off to them and complains about what's happening, and I have met a lot of freelancers and I've managed a few who are like that, the first thing you do is get rid of them as soon as you can because you know they're going to be a problem. Now, this is possibly something that's unique to Web3. I don't know how much this happens in the real world. So again, I'll use Spool as an example. When I joined, I was the only member of the team with a contract. And I only had a contract because I would not start work for them until they signed it to say they were going to pay me. And there was a lot in Web3 of, oh no, trust us, you can start the work now, we'll pay you down the line. There was a lot of people I know who were working in the space. There was one guy worked with a company, he was full-time with them. And I'd worked with him, that's how I'd met him. And I had left, and about 3 or 4 months later I was talking to him. And I said, I left because I felt they were running out of money. And he said, well, that makes sense. They haven't paid me for the last 3 months. But he didn't want to leave and quit because he knew they'd just kick him out of the groups. And he was halfway around the world for me. He was in Argentina or somewhere, and they're all sat in Europe. And he was like, just won't pay me. I'll never hear from them again. And I'll be 3 months contract down. And if you don't have a contract, they can't pay you. Or they won't. They don't have to pay you. Which is a bizarre thing to say for people if you've ever worked in companies before, most people get that. But there is a surprising amount of startups and consultants for whom the contract is a secondary consideration. They won't do it until suddenly it comes to the point and you speak to them and they say, yeah, I've not been paid by this client. It's like, well, what did the contract say? Oh, I didn't get one. So, well, you're kind of out of luck then. There's nothing you can do in that case. That said, contracts are also not always worth much. So I had a client 3 years ago now. I'd done some work with them. They seemed very positive. I'd done the technical scoping for this massive VR, AI enhanced, augmented reality crypto thing they were building. So I'd done all the technical scoping and they'd paid me for that, so it's fine. And they said, look, we want you to work with us for the next few months as well to help with these things. So I did that, and it came time for them to pay me, and they said, oh, we're just waiting for the funds to come through from the VC. So I said, okay, well, I'll stop work then. You've had the invoice. All the messages saying, yep, we're going to pay you. It's all fine. Fast forward to 2 years later, I'd taken them to court in Ireland. I'd had very abusive messages from them saying, of course, we're going to pay you. We'll see you in court. They didn't turn up. I had won all the case, and I spoke to the lawyer and said, well, what do I do now? And they said, well, we can send the sheriff around to their office if you want. I was like, well, their office is their law firm, so that means there's no one going to be there. The law firm will just turn me away. And that was it. I'm kind of out of options. Several £1,000s down, no real option to chase it up. And that's why the second part of this is And companies do not like this. I pretty much always insist on payment in advance. And I recommend to any startup and any contractor that they should do the same. And I know particularly when people are starting out, again, in the marketing space, there's lots of people I know who have just started out as a freelancer. They're going to clients, they're trying to, selling can be quite hard if you're not used to selling. And they want to soften it as much as they can. So they say, well, you pay me at the end, you pay in installments, all this stuff. And then the same thing, they turn around 6 months later and say, I've not been paid for that work. And sometimes they don't even have the funds to go and get a lawyer to send the letter out to them. But I've had a lot of them where it's either been, yeah, we'll pay you when we can. And when you get the legal letter sent, suddenly they find the payment. Or I say people who just dig their heels in and flat out refuse to pay. So on the other side to that, if anyone wants a really well-scoped technical AI Web3 solution architecture model, the NDA has expired on that. So I'm quite happy to go and talk to anyone about it. But you really need to make sure you're being paid for stuff. I know so many contractors who money is seen as a dirty word. They don't like to talk about it. It makes them uncomfortable. My background, I started off in sales, so I have no problem asking people for money. It's the first thing I learned how to do. But I know contractors who won't do it, and then they won't chase on it as well because it makes them feel uncomfortable. That's the first thing you need to get over with this, is you need to get paid for what you're doing. Now this one is one of my more controversial ones because I'm a bit of a generalist. I've done sales, I've done marketing, I've done development, I've done product management, martial arts, I've done close protection, and all these stupid random things. And I've had people say to me, why didn't you just pick a lane and stick in it? And the reason is because A, I was working with startups, but B, I wanted to be able to work in these spaces and solve their problems for them. So by not specialising, it gave me more opportunities to do that sort of thing. So I'll give Spool as another example. So again, with Spool, I started initially I was a part-time copywriter for them, focusing on their technical articles and thought leadership. I did the website for them once, and because of that, I started working with the developer team separately. So I did technical documents for them. Because of that, they introduced me to another client who I did some tech consulting with, and I wrote their technical documents. But if I had been sat there at the start and said I can only do copywriting, I wouldn't have had the option to jump between them. I wouldn't have the flexibility. The trade-off is it takes time to learn enough skills at a decent enough level to be able to do that. I know there was a guy when I was working, it wasn't with Spool, it was with another client, and he was quite young, he was in his early 20s, and he was saying, yeah, I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this. And I thought, well, how long did you do that for professionally? He went, I did that for 2 months. I went, well, okay, so you understand it conceptually, but you haven't got the skills to actually go off and charge a premium rate for that skill. Like if you'd done a brief bit of copywriting part-time for a client for a few months, I said, well, you can't go and expect to charge the same as, I do for my copywriting, for example, or one of the other tech specialists do. This, though, and again, when people swap from working in the real world as part of a company, they like you to specialize. They like you to funnel down that way and stick to the one thing, because that's what your job is. As soon as you step out of that, and one of the biggest problems I see with companies is, and everyone who runs their own business will know, you have to do everything. You can't suddenly say, I am just a developer. Suddenly you've got to do the account, you've got to do the business management, you've got to do the marketing, you've got to do the sales. And having a broad specialism before you go into that helps you a lot more than just doing that, than actually doing the work as well. It also means if you're hiring people for those roles, you have an understanding of what they are doing. Again, I've worked with companies where the founders have been, Web3 had a lot of very, very technical founders, very developer heavy, the genius level developers, but they were hiring marketing teams who could barely string a word together, and they didn't understand, because they had no experience in that space at all, why and what the output wasn't doing what they wanted, why it was so poor quality, because they just didn't even realize it was poor quality. And you need that sort of broad skill set, particularly if you're doing stuff on your own, just to be able to have a conceptual understanding of the people you're bringing in. And once you start to scale, it's less of a problem because you hire specialists and then they do that work for you. But if you're a small startup, having that understanding of being able to look over someone's shoulder and say, right, this works or isn't what you want to be doing is really critical in it. The last main lesson, I've spoken quite quickly, so I've got through them quite fast, but this is one of the harsh realities of working, particularly if you're consulting or you're working with startups. Everyone talks about how great you want your portfolio to be, and you want this rich list of clients you've had. A good 70% of my clients, the work I might have done for them might have been the best thing in the world, but the company collapsed. So the one with the pitch deck, for example, the deck was really good, the product was really good. Some pillock down the road ran translation through Google Translate, came up with nonsense and scuppered the business. And as a result of that, you find it hard to talk about it. And this is one of the real problems I've had. I've worked with some potentially very big clients. I've done some work I was particularly pleased of with them, but people look at it and go, well, they didn't do anything. How good could it really have been? And when you see this continually happening, it's quite disheartening because you know that things fail and it's not your responsibility. And unfortunately, you have to get over it. It's one of those things, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to go off and start your own business, you have to develop a thick skin, because you will get people saying to you, there was one client I worked with over here called Money Talks. A guy called Brendan ran it. I did the technical scoping again for that one. Spoke to him about his developers. I don't know quite why, but it never really went anywhere. But a very good project. He'd come up with a really good idea for this and he really understood it. So, but people say to me now, well, yeah, but they never built it. So the work I did is kind of not tarnished by it, but I can't really be that proud of it. And there's other projects I've worked with in the past where they have, particularly in Web3, collapsed catastrophically, shall we say, sometimes overnight. And one of the nice things about working in Web3 was the chance to see companies fail and why they fail. So has anyone heard of Terra Luna? So this was one of the biggest Web3 collapses that happened. It was a stable coin. So it was an algorithmically tethered stable coin. So the idea was their crypto token would always be worth $1. And they had a load of very impressive looking maths to ensure it happened to do with their other token. And one day it stopped being worth $1. And in the space of a few days, they lost 50 billion in valuation overall. And I got to watch that in real time. I was on a video call with a mate of mine in the US, and we were literally watching the chart do this. And you'd see occasionally people would buy into it to try and bump the price up, but we could see them artificially trying to stabilize it. And so while some never launch, some just go down in flames catastrophically. And you have to be able to step back from those and get a level of separation from them, unless it's your fault they're failing. There are some projects I know where I've worked with people and you say to them, and you hear that they were connected to a project, and you say, well, what did you do there? And they won't tell you. And you go and talk to someone else in the project and say, oh yeah, they wrote the code, the bit that got hacked. Yeah, that was them. In Web3, it was always the bridges and the oracles that got hacked. And I knew a company who'd built oracles, which basically take off-chain data and put it on-chain. And
they hadn't done it very well at all. So companies that were using them just kept getting hit with attacks and kept losing millions. And again, if you're a startup, everyone talks about the idea that you see all these entrepreneurs on YouTube and TikTok and everyone going, oh yes, it's great, I failed 100 times and all these, but now I'm a billionaire. Good for you, mate. Most of us can't afford to fail 100 times. But most companies do fail. And most startups fail quite badly. There's various stats around it, but something like 70 to 80% of startups fail within the first few years. And that's something you have to face. I know, again, so many founders who just couldn't comprehend the idea that this business they had built would fail. Um, and there was one I worked with. I was with him for a few months. Again, I was brought into the marketing team. One I knew was building this marketing team with all the people she really knew and trusted. And I got a phone call from her late night one night saying, "Yeah, I've been told everyone's going." I said, "What do you mean everyone?" She said, "We're letting the entire company go, apart from 4 people." And they had raised, I'm not sure exactly how much they raised, but anywhere from 20 to 40 million 2 years earlier. And they had burned through it. And, you can't, I couldn't fathom how this company had burned through so much money so quickly. And it never occurred to me, but it literally happened overnight. And I was going, "Well, when are they doing it?" She said, "No, you're the last person. Everyone else has already been fired." And that night she had phoned everyone up and they just dropped them straight away. Um, with Spool, I was there for 2 years. Similar thing happened. One of the CMOs, again, we used to have very strange Monday morning meetings where, with surprising regularity, the CMO would come on the call. It was a marketing meeting. And he would say, "I've had an argument with the founders. I'm gone. Bye." And he just got off the call. You'd never hear from them again. And this happened. We brought in a new CMO and again, he put me on a call and he said, "Yeah, we're really sorry. We're letting you go." And to be fair to them, Spool were really good about it. They gave you 2 weeks notice, which everyone else, it's a case of, "No, we're out of money now." And that's one, well, originally it was one of the reasons I got out of Web3, but it's quite common with companies. It had it happen more recently than that with a company where I won't name, where the same thing happened. I got a call from the founder one day. I was chatting to him and said, "I'm going to send you my invoice tomorrow." I went, "Oh, no, you can't do that. I've got the money." I said, "But a week ago, you were assuring me you had the funds to last another 6 months." And yeah, well, end of the day, it doesn't matter what his excuses. They don't have the money. They can't pay. And you need to have those backup plans in place as part of that to ensure that someone else's screw ups don't absolutely ruin what you're doing. So, should make that bit of tune shorter. Is there any questions about blockchain and working in it, or anything along those lines? Before I talk a bit about AI side of things. What's happening in blockchain? Because it was a big thing. I mean, I understand what it is, a ledger, and, you know, but it seems to, you never hear anything about anything these days. Yeah, it's a weird one because it's massive for a while, but it only gets massive when something either catastrophically bad or astronomically good happens. So the problem is the only use case of blockchain, and when this goes online, people will probably complain to me, let's say, but the only use of blockchain is self-custodial digital ownership. And that's it. They're all looking for use cases, they're all trying to find these things, and that is the only use case. And what happens is then there's not actually that many people who have an awareness that that is a problem or a need for it. So back in 2008, when all housing markets collapsed, Bitcoin was released, and it made sense then. Problem is, no one would do it, no one used it. And when it swapped to being kind of a financial asset, and particularly recently with the way the focus is on institutional ownership and institutional control, a lot of the early fans have either shifted to becoming, actually, it's not about ownership anymore, it's about becoming rich, or they've kind of left the space altogether. That's one of the reasons I got out of it, because particularly with Trump's approach and his commenting on Bitcoin and his promotion of it, a lot of the people in the space who were very Bitcoin heavy kind of went down his path and started saying, "Oh, he's great, we should definitely be president," or this is a, I fundamentally disagree with that fact. So it made it a very hard place to be working when it becomes more and more politicized along those lines. Whereas originally it was designed not to be at all. Um, but they're still having the same problems they always had, that the use cases aren't quite there apart from number go up. And that's the only use case that really has mass market appeal. So when Bitcoin has a massive spike, everyone goes, "Oh, it's great," and it appears in papers again. When one of them crashed, like when Terra Luna went down, it was, it was carnage because that absolutely wiped out so much of the industry. And there was lots of news coverage about it, so everyone's talking about it. Well, I know something. When I stepped back from my focus on crypto back in, 18 months ago, I moved to the AI side. As soon as you step out from direct interaction with that space, you realize how small an ecosystem it is and how few people are actually actively involved in it relative to Malta. Um, but in essence, not a lot. They're still trying to find use cases. There's still so many scams happening and so many people spilling up garbage. And because it's so cyclic, is why you end up witnessing that. There's loads of scams. Everyone involved learns about the scams and stops doing the scams. And the price drops again. And it sort of flattens out for a while. Loads of new people join who don't know about the scams, so the scams start ramping up again. And that keeps happening over and over again. And it kills the long-term appeal for a lot of people. I know with a couple of the companies I worked with, we were looking at building more institutional solutions for it. So particularly banking infrastructure on it. Because a single bank with a few billion assets under management could have absolutely changed the face of crypto. But because it was so temperamental and there was so many hacks and some of the tech was genius, some of it was absolute garbage. And it's very hard to know which is which when people are building new programming languages and just throwing stuff out there. So the banks wouldn't touch it. And that's what it really needed. It needed a big injection of external money and new people to use it. And all they got was people going, "Well, I'll buy it and hold it as a form of money." So, no, but I've not seen any particularly revolutionary things in recently. Any other questions on that side? Or? So, yeah, that's crypto and Web3. It's a bonkers space for 5 years with some absolutely crazy things that didn't. But let's look at the next step in the adventure. And my habitat for this one's much more calmer because I've been working with the government to be much more respectable now I have to behave. Activating AI and working with the government, there's one real message show me, and that's that if you don't move, you die. And that's really the state of the Isle of Man now. That a lot of people are complaining, well, new businesses aren't moving here. We're not seeing much change. We're not seeing GDP growth. E-gaming is pretty much gone, was very much in decline.
And there's lots of complaining, but there's no real action. And that's the thing. If you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to run your own company, you have to be prepared to take action. You have to take that step and take the risks, make the moves. Because if you don't, and I see a lot of companies that fail because of this, you just end up complaining about it. And that's kind of where we are on the island now, that there's a lot of people complaining about things not happening, but not many of them actually going, well, actually, this is what it takes for me to move the needle. This is what it takes for me to step up and do stuff. I know there's a few Activate partners here who aren't on camera, so they can nod in, who are the same situation where we talk to companies and they're not prepared to make the move. And with AI, if you don't make the move, you fall behind very, very rapidly. I say I was playing with Grok the other day, or a couple of days ago, and it will make fully lifelike video renders with voice that are indistinguishable from a real video footage in about 10 seconds for free. I mean, this is the level we're now playing at, and that people are going to be, well, no, I've not tried ChatGPT, or I've had it write a poem for me. There are companies out there which, in the US particularly, there are VCs looking for companies who are no people companies. And one of them announced a while ago they are looking for the first $1 billion sub 10 person company, because AI and automation are enabling that to be a reality. And again, if companies aren't keeping up, if they're not moving with this and they're doing the wait and see or the fast follower approach, whatever they want to call it, there's no such thing as wait and see and fast follow. You're either in the pack or you are dead in the water behind them somewhere. So that's really a lesson from the AI side, and having formally worked in it now for the last 18 months or so. That's what I'm seeing in companies, that if you are not keeping up, you fall behind too far to keep up. And it's only going to get a lot worse in the coming months.
Do you think it's just the Isle of Man, or do you see it in other places?
I do, but not to the level I see it over here. The Isle of Man generally has always been a bit slow to respond, should we say. Yes, I mean, I've lived here 45 years, so I'm trying to be polite about it, but dear God, it's times, it's horrendous. There's this attitude of, there's a boat in the morning if you don't like it. Solve your problems. Don't just expect people to leave, actually help them solve the problems you have. There's the old joke, how many Manxmen does it take to change a light bulb? None, we don't like change. And I remember hearing that joke when I was younger, and it's really coming home to me now that companies and people will not change. And I've recently rejoined Facebook, God help me. And you see the vitriol and the behaviour of people on there who just will not accept that we are not in the 1950s anymore, and that technology and society has moved on, and all these things have happened. I do see it in other places though, but I haven't seen it necessarily to the extent I see it over here. But that might just be because I'm in the thick of it here. And the small scale of it here means these things are amplified. Whereas if, say, you were even in the UK, it's not moving as quickly as a lot of the world is. There's enough people there that if a small percentage make a move, it seems like a lot of people. Here, if a small percentage make the move, it's a small number.
More encouragement there in the UK.
Yeah.
To actually encourage AI companies. You've got the Kendall moving into the liver buildings, haven't you? That's going to generate, they reckon, £1 billion in, I think it was 5-6 years.
Yeah.
Quoted. They've already started their first, but obviously that's then encouraged by Liverpool and Corporation are heavy behind the backing of that, and they've completely redeveloped the insides of the liver buildings. They've spent a fortune, which has obviously benefited the building trade and stuff like that, which then has a knock-on effect. But obviously, our government don't seem to support anything.
I mean, part of the
startup fund for 3,000, but 12 months later, if you
Yeah.
want it.
I mean, part of the problem is economies of scale as well. That if you're in the UK and you have a company that needs a few million quid throwing at it to get going, there's enough population to support that. Here, the scale of it means we don't necessarily have that, and we can't necessarily justify it the same way. But it could happen. I mean, I would like to see more. And again, being diplomatic, because I'm on camera, whereas you're sat behind it, so it could be anyone. I think, I'm hoping, I mean, I don't know exactly what's happening with the new AI office. I know there's going to be some announcements coming out and it's supposed to launch in them. Whether or not they push it more or they go for a different tactic is still up in the air as far as I'm aware. He said even more diplomatically.
What's the most common hesitation with the companies you're talking about?
Over here, it's money. Every company I speak to, where they're interested in it but they don't want to do it, it's because they go, "Oh, what do you mean it'll cost thousands?" I mean, as you know, Zach, it's expensive.
They don't see the ROI?
They do, or they don't understand that it's cost justified for it. And part of this is, because I've done marketing and sales, it's price anchoring. So because we've done a lot of free talks, and there's several people here who have, part of the approach is, well, AI is free. I've done 36 odd talks on my own. And that's a lot of free time we're giving out to people where, yes, we're being paid for it by the government, but the people themselves,
People are seeing it, they're not seeing the
they just think it's a free thing.
You
So
have the same message, so you're sending out saying we'll have a unicorn or a billion-dollar company with sub 10 people.
Yeah.
That's the same message we're saying, well, it's cheaper to produce.
Yeah.
And so
But it is, but it's trying to get that across. That
Yeah.
actually, yes,
it's cheaper.
But it's a front-loaded cost.
That's right.
Yeah.
You do need to protect it. You do need to put
Yeah.
guardrails in place. And
Yeah, and you do need to pay that initial thing to get the data set up, and it's an expensive initial cost to get it going, and that's the real problem with it. That you can say, yep, you might save £1,000 a month for the next 2 years, but it'll cost you 10 now. And again, global economic climate isn't great. Businesses are having trouble. A lot of companies just don't have the means to do that. Unfortunately, a lot of them, it's because they've waited too long, and they've waited until things are so bad that they suddenly go, right, we've got to do it now. And then they don't have the funds to do it and don't have the means to do it. But I do think a big part of it is this price anchoring, that we've been doing advice and training and all these things for free. And people who come to that then come and talk to us. And suddenly we're jumping from, yep, it's a free service here to, well, to build something for you might start at 5, 10, 15K. And that's a big price hurdle for them to overcome. But pricing is the big one I see a lot. The other one is the same I see everywhere. It's data quality. That you talk to them and say, well, how are your records? And they go, well, this guy's got a load in his head. There's a stack of paperwork over here. Somewhere in this cupboard there might be some more. And then buried in 300 different file structures in Microsoft somewhere is the last bit of it. And again, as you can't do it without having decent data. So we're going to have to fix that first anyway. And by the time they fix that, a lot of the time, they've dealt with a lot of their problems, or they've just burnt through all their money hiring people to do that. But yeah, there is that, but I'd say it's also this just hesitancy to change this idea of, we'll wait and see. We don't want to do it until someone else has done it. So I remember one of the companies I worked with in Web3, we're having a meeting, roundtable once for the marketing strategy. And I said, we want some crazy, unique, different idea. And they asked me, so I gave them some really crazy, unique ideas. And they said, well, can you tell me anyone else who's done this? I went, well, no. You just asked me to make up something absolutely bonkers for you. I did it. And you went, oh, that's good. And then you're asking me who else has done it. But it's that sort of thing here that the cutting edge is now so close to, or so fast, and the change it's bringing is so fast that people don't want to be on the bleeding edge. They want to be in the nice, safe bit. But the nice, safe bit is so far behind the bleeding edge now. And the pace to catch up is so big that they just can't do it.
I still find it crazy how businesses you go into, and it's almost like it isn't happening.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even in the conversation. Like you go to, we go to the AI meetups, and the conversations that happen there, and then but what's actually happening day to day in businesses is it's a completely different world.
Yeah. And again, a lot of the stuff that's happening with AI is invisible. It's happening in the back end. And people just aren't aware that's going on. I mean, I spoke to someone the other day, and they were talking about Facebook, and I said, yeah, I can spot, the amount of, the phrase was, the amount of AI generated content on Facebook has gone down. And I said, no, it's just got a lot better. And they went, no, it hasn't. I went, here it is. And I showed them one of the videos. I was like, this is AI. And they went, no, it's not. It's like, I literally just made it on my phone this morning. It is. And because the curve's gone so fast, they haven't had the time to adjust. And say people don't like change, so they just sort of bury their heads in the sand, ignore it, and then when it comes to the crunch, go, now I need to do it, and don't have the money to do it. Not that I'm bitter. I've got some bitter old man here. But I say that's, one of the challenges here is definitely that problem that, and the companies that can afford to do it as well often are not just based on the island. So again, I've spoken to ones before where they've said, yeah, we'd love to do it, but we're part of this group. They have a different approach, and they're then picking from a global marketplace of people to work with.
So is the AI office that's coming up, is one of it, what's its remit? Is its remit going to be to showcase local talent?
I would say, I believe there might be an announcement coming out from them quite soon.
26th of January was on the news that it put out.
Yeah.
I think. It said it was going to be the 26th.
I think that's the official launch date. I think there might be something coming out from them on Friday. Possibly there might be some announcements. I don't know what the... Yeah. I don't know quite what those announcements are going to be or how they're going to approach it. if nothing else, my hope is that maybe by announcing and having a formal office, companies will go, well, actually, maybe we should pull our fingers out and do something with this now. And there might be some.
Some people are scared about paying this money to put the product in.
Yeah.
And then you make this AI office, and then they go, well, actually, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And then you've got to roll it back.
Yeah, that's another tricky one, the regulatory side. It's an interesting one, though, because I don't think and again, I'm not saying what they are or not doing, I don't think they're going to be a regulatory body, certainly at this stage. And we actually saw the same thing in blockchain and crypto as well, that companies just wanted clarity in regulation so they could go to a country. They didn't really care what the regulations were, providing it was clear. But governments don't regulate tech stacks, they regulate use cases. And that's the same we're seeing with AI, that all the regulations are already in play. It's just they're not called AI regulations, so people have to dig through and figure it out. And that's the thing with X at the minute and the whole child pornography issue they've got. There are plenty of regulations in place to say if you are producing child pornography, you should go to jail. They don't necessarily need brand new AI regulations for that. But again, companies, I mean, that's the thing. If the Isle of Man government did turn around and say, actually, here's a load of new regulations, that could be a risk for them. But equally, they can't afford to wait for the government to catch up. Governments, by their nature, are not fast beasts. And this is very, very fast. As some of you who remain unnamed, because you will know as partners. But thank you for coming along. If there's no other questions, I will wrap up. That QR code will take you to my personal website, because Architect is currently down because I had problems with the host, so I built my own personal one instead for now. I am chronically online, so if you do get any questions, although most of you here I talk to fairly regularly anyway, do come along, ping me online, drop me a message, and let me know any questions you've got. But thank you for coming.